Sometimes with Google Sheets, you may run into a situation where you have several pieces of information in one cell, and yet you'd like to split that information out over, well, 2 or 3 cells instead. Well, you can do that, and very easily, so it takes no time to do. You can also very easily find duplicates, and that may be something that you also have done from time to time, or at least tried to do, maybe even try to write a formula, but Sheets does a lot of that fairly automatically. So let's look at finding duplicates as well. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and let's look at ways that Sheets can save you time. As I look at our first example, I can see that it's just a fairly normal address list with the names, first and last name in column A. With the street, we have just the street information. And then in column C, we have city, state, and zip. 3 separate pieces of information in one cell. And so we might decide that we want to have city in column C, state in column D, and E, we would want to have zip. But let's look at this carefully because we do have some irregularities in our data that might cause us issues, so we want to look at this. First of all, I see that St. Louis and Kansas City actually are cities with 2 names, which means we have a space between the 2 words. In some instances, that might cause us an issue. Also, as I look at this, I see that I have commas after every state abbreviation, so that should work. If I didn't have commas after every state abbreviation, that might also cause an issue. But because that's fairly consistent, I think we have a pretty good chance here of doing some great things. So I'm going to select column C, and then I'm going to go to data and almost all the way to the bottom to split text to columns. When I do that, I can see that a little separator selector pops up and it says, well, do you want to detect automatically? And as I look at my columns here, it's done a really good job. So I am fine with what it's done. And then I'm just going to click off and kind of set that information into stone. And we have very easily separated city, state, and zip into separate columns. With our next example, we want to look at the names because originally we just had first and last name, but now we have things like different kinds of titles, perhaps a junior and senior. We have middle initials. We have titles at the first of the person's name. We have all sorts of things that might make a difference in how this text, if we decide that we want to split all of that out into separate columns, how that would work. So let's think about that. We have a title, then we have first name, then we have middle initial, last name, and then either that junior, senior, or some other sort of professional designation. So that's 5 columns, and yet we only have 1 here. What we need to do is add more blank columns, and it's always better to have more columns. Here I'm going to go to Insert Column Right. It's always better to have more in columns and then maybe delete one later on, as opposed to have not enough columns, because if you don't have enough columns to split all this information out, you wind up overwriting some of your existing data. So let's see, that's 1 column. I'm going to right-click again, insert another one to the right. I have 2, so now I'm going to select 2 columns, do a right-click, and insert 2 columns to the right. So now I have that total of 5, including column A. So we can select column A, and we'll go back to data, and then come down to split text to columns. And it says, so how do you want to do this? Well, let's see. We definitely have the commas. We could say space, And that actually works out pretty well because no one actually has all 5 elements. From here, you would need to do some sort of moving the information so that you had everything in the right place. So this is probably the easiest one to see. I'll just drag this to the right, and then we're still leaving a space because we didn't come up with a doctor or a Mr. or anything like that for the first column. And so we would need to do some cleanup, splitting this out, but that was so much faster than trying to take each piece of information and putting it in the right cell. We could take these two, take my hand, grab those, move them to the right, and then this is a first name, so let's see, it'll be in first name. So that's so much easier than trying to move 3 pieces individually. Or here I only have a first and a last name to worry about. Okay, here's the last name, first name. Oh, and this even had a title. Here I have first name, last name. I can kind of line these up a bit where I have the first name, grab the last name, and just drag it a little bit more. So while it's not as pretty as having some sort of way of just fixing everything automatically, it still gets us a lot closer to where we wanted to be. For our third example, we're going to shift gears a little bit here. I've added in a column with very fake Social Security numbers, but sometimes you need to know some unique identifier for each person. And with large address lists, it's almost inevitable that you are going to have duplicated information. And what we're going to do is look for the duplicates, and then we're going to discuss, well, how much do we look for to determine whether this is actually a duplicate or not. So I'm just going to select our data here. And we can see right off that Kimberly Statham is in fact a duplicate name. Now you can have 2 people with the exact same name, even in the same city, sometimes living blocks apart. So you can't say that just because there are 2 names that look identical, that those are one person. They could very well be 2 people. Well, the Social Security then narrows that down a bit because Kimberly has the same Social Security number in both of these records. Now, it would be tempting to say, okay, well, then this is a duplicate record. But in fact, when we look at Kimberly's street, even if she has the same city, state, and zip, which she does, the street is very different in these 2 records. It probably implies that she has moved from one address to another address. You would then need to not delete the duplicate, but look at it and say, we need to do more research, contact her, find out what the current address is, that kind of thing. But it's something that you need to be kind of careful about. And yet, if we can look at a list and then find the duplicates, which is such a problem, who wants to create extra mailing labels and pay the postage for some letter that you're sending out company-wide and having a person get 2 or 3 of them because the checking duplications wasn't done. So here we go. We have all of this information, and this time we're going to go to data, but not quite as far down. We're going to go to data cleanup. And then as I go to the right, we're going to remove duplicates. So I'm going to click remove duplicates, and this is where it becomes very important that we think this through. So we have data has header row. Yes, it does. So we're going to check that. And it still tells us that we have 12 rows and 4 columns selected. Do we want to select everything? Well, here's the thing. If I select city, state, zip, there are several people who live in the same city, same state, and because they live in the same city and they don't live so far apart, they also have the same zip. So that doesn't really prove anything. There are a lot of large cities that will be duplicated in a large list. However, when we come here and we look at name, well, we know that that's not good enough. There can be more than one person with the same name. Social Security, now if name and Social Security match, it should be legally the same person. However, if there's a different street, we know that we need to keep both of those records. Those records are unique. So here we have all three. We remove duplicates and it says, nope, no duplicate rows were found, which is true. They're all unique, and we'll say okay. But now let's say that we're not thinking this through correctly. We go to data. Let's go down to data cleanup and remove duplicates. But this time we're going to say, nope, we don't want column D, but we also don't want to even check that street. We just want to check the name and the Social Security number. What's going to happen? We click remove duplicates and one row was found and removed. And in a large sheet, here's a real problem. You won't even know what it was. But 11 unique rows remain, and okay. Now this could very well be her old address. This is where we have to be careful, but if you need to remove duplicates, how easy is this? And how wonderful it is that Google Sheets has some functions that can really save you some time. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, Learning Express Library, LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy Business. We also premiere videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel.